So, among the many, many, many little and not so little stories, many of them unknown, untold, often silenced, from the regions that we know very little about. And I would put the states of the Northeast. We use the word Northeast, although I know it's not the correct thing. But instead of spelling out all the 7, 8 states there, we just choose to club them together under this one word. So many of the stories which come out from this region called the Northeast are unknown. And over the years, as you heard, because I've been traveling there, and of course I'm an outsider who tried to be an insider, I have been trying to gather some of these stories. A lot of them have come out in fiction, some in non-fiction anthologies as well. And we were very happy when we decided to put together this anthology called Insider Outsider, because in many ways, I think this is exactly where most of us find ourselves. And it's not just the stories from the Northeast, but I think stories across India, because everybody is an insider at some point, and when you draw another line there, then you become quickly the outsider. We've all faced that, right from partition and even before that. So many of the stories in this, this is all non-fiction writing. It's all extremely personal essays as well, mostly. A couple of them being academic or journalistic, but mostly they're all extremely personal essays. So the two people who are here with me, Jahnavi and Paramjit, both have stories of Shillong. That's another thing, that in this anthology, somehow Shillong seems to be predominant. Maybe because it is this microcosm where a lot of people found themselves. After that, of course, Shillong came away from Assam into Meghalaya, and that created its own set of stories and traumas. So I don't want to take too much time, but maybe we can begin on that point of what is home? Where do you think your home is? And how do you belong? And who tells you to belong or to not belong or to unbelong?
Thanks, Preeti. I think this anthology was about the very fundamental question of what is home. So, when we were asked to write, we were told to write about how the Northeast views the mainland and how does the mainland view the Northeast, the different perspectives that these two very different regions have. But having sat down to write it, when I started thinking about it, I realized it was a very personal, fundamental question of belonging, unbelonging, and the idea of home. And I've written in my essay that those of us who are lucky to be in one place for a long period of time, people settled in Delhi all their lives. I envy people like that, or in Bangalore saying, I'm from Bangalore, I'm from Delhi. But when you move around a lot, the idea of home becomes a very, very nebulous thing, really. And the first thing, of course, is where you come from. And I come from Shillong, although I'm ethnically an Assamese. And what happened in the Northeast was that the British decided to make Shillong the capital of that region. Good climate, reminded them of Scotland, Scotland of the East, and they settled there. And very naturally, as happens to any capital city, it was just flooded with people from outside. And I think any capital city doesn't end up belonging to one people, it ends up belonging to everybody by the sheer fact that it is a capital city. So what's happened to a Delhi, what's happened to a Bangalore, what happens to Mumbai happened to Shillong long ago. What we didn't realize along the way, what we don't realize in Bangalore now, is that the local people felt overwhelmed. And feeling overwhelmed, being threatened, a loss of an identity or land or your language or culture, leads to many, many ramifications, which play out in the long term in many, many different ways. So while I had a lovely childhood in Geelong, I never felt out of place. We were cocooned, perhaps within our own Assamese community. School was wonderful. When the state split and we had to move down to Guwahati, it was a very different thing. I realized growing up that while I was very happy there, perhaps at many points I was looked upon as an outsider. And it didn't leave a very easy feeling in my stomach when I realized that. But it happens anywhere else. From Shillong, I came to Guwahati, came to Delhi. Coming to Delhi from Northeast was an eye-opener. Like Preeti said, you had to explain, if you're from the Northeast or from anywhere in the very margins, if you're from deep South or deep up North or deep Northeast, Delhi really questions you. And I always say I have this mixed deep love and deep apprehension of Delhi because it makes you question yourself a lot. And you realize that there's many things which make home. In the end, you get to love a city. I mean, the neem trees of Delhi, the Lodi gardens, the sunset on the tombs of the Lodi kings makes me realize that that's part of me too. So the idea of home is really a very nebulous thing. In the end, it's like I've said, it's the people, it's the experiences, it's many threads which go together to make that one piece of cloth which you call home, really. And but for us in the Northeast, it's become a political question. It's become a very emotional question. It's a highly charged idea, really. Paramjit?
So in my case, the idea of home is even more nebulous because my parents came across during partition from Rawalpindi, and my father built a home after 40 years. Long after I had got my job and got into tea, I was working on the gardens. So I was used to shifting every 3 years or 5 years. But that was chance. So I always thought that the whole of the country belongs to me. I can go and live anywhere. But lately, this feeling has been there that maybe I can't. And it's become important to belong to a place. So when people ask me, where do you come from? I have no answer as such. My parents had a house in Dehradun, which we sold after they passed away. So I've never lived in Dehradun. I lived, if at all, the most of my years in Shillong. And I find that I still get called a Dakar, which bothers me. My wife is a Khasi. We've been married for 37 years. And I've got a son sitting there, a younger son who's sitting here. And so this question of identity is hurtful in the sense that when we were kids, I don't remember asking anybody where you were from. That thing was not there. So apart from this religious discrimination you may think about, there's also discrimination in terms of belonging to a community or not belonging to a community. So unless you live in a place which is majority of your own community, I think you have some issues. And in the Northeast, I think those issues have got magnified much more. So I still can't say where I belong, which is my hometown. And recently, I just moved from Shillong to Guwahati after having spent 30 years because I can't buy a place. After my parents' house sold, then I have to buy another property because I can't buy a property in my name. Otherwise, I end up paying capital gains. So I bought a house in Guwahati. So it's a new experience. I haven't lived in Guwahati for even a week as yet. Thank you.
So like I remember when I first started traveling in the Northeast, and that must have been a good, I don't know, maybe 25, 27 years ago for work. And of course, everybody started to ask me at that point that you don't belong here. You're not from any of these states of the Northeast. So how come you're coming here and you're Punjabi and your features and everything else obviously puts you in the north of India, somewhere else, definitely not from here. So what are you doing here? And it used to be like a really strange question. Also, I remember going to Nagaland on one of my completely the first trip, I think, to Nagaland, sitting at this cafe, and everybody else there was either a foreigner or was Naga. And the Naga gent sitting next to me asked me that, do you see everybody around? Everybody's, there's not even one Indian over here except me. And that was when it came home to me that obviously not only that so-called mainland India is not very welcome elsewhere, but also that, you're being, I had never thought of myself as being in a foreign place where I have to say that I'm Indian. So who is this Indian? I mean, do you ever give this a thought? Like, when you go away from the country, yes, but in your own country, why would you need the inner line permit? Why would you need anything like that to travel in your own country or be singled out as being Indian?
Inner land permit, of course, is a political thing, protection of Northeast, and they have so much logic around it. That's another matter, totally. But yes, when you're out of India, you're naturally Indian. So right after I was in Delhi as a child, we went for a couple of years to the UK. And my goodness, suddenly from being questioned in Delhi as to you're from Northeast, are you Chinese, do you eat monkeys? Suddenly I'm Indian and I'm representing tandoori chicken and everything else, So it's in 1 month I was totally Indian, but I'm back in Delhi, I'm not Indian. But in the UK, I'm Indian. It's very confusing, right? But really, Preeti, when you think about what is an Indian, and I've lived in Bangalore now. I came here in 1992 to study, and I've been on and off in the city for so long now, 28, 29 years. And I have to say this about Bangalore. This is one city in which I wasn't questioned. And I came here and I just felt Indian. My differences were welcomed. What I wore was welcomed, saying, you didn't get that mekhala for us. My food was welcomed, saying, give me your food, take my food. There was a give and take. And then I thought, this is how it should be. celebrate our differences, learn from each other, borrow from each other, and in the end, you realize you're Indian. I don't know if the same Bangalore still exists, but it certainly was that way when I came in, and I said, yes, this is a city I can live in. It doesn't question you too much. It just welcomes you with open arms, you know. Having said that, this thing about community, looks, is so fragile. This one little incident I narrate as a joke. I was sitting in a Bangkok shopping mall, me and my son, and people say, yes, I look Northeast. I don't look. Another thing is, you don't look chinky. You don't look Northeast when they look at me. But as I'm growing older, I'm getting a little chinkier, so I'm living up to that. So sitting in a Bangkok shopping mall, my son and I, who was smaller then, he had a round chubby face, and someone came, two obviously Indian ladies came to me and said, where do you buy your clothes? I said, I've also come here, I buy it here. No, I mean, where do you local women buy your clothes? So I said, hey, now I'm Thai. Suddenly I'm from Bangkok, you know? So it's so fragile, really. What you look like, what you wear, what you eat, what your accent sounds like. I think in the end, it's a question of where home is and what you can say is home. I can say Bangalore is home and Bangalore is India, and Assam is home and Assam is India, and Delhi is also home in a very deep-rooted way, and Delhi is India. So this is India, right?
But I also think that it comes from basically a thing of actually not knowing and not being curious enough to know. So I found, at least when I was traveling in the Northeast and I met all these people and I got to know them and I got to know their stories, they became friends, neighbors, whatever. It's then that you build these bridges. So I think that's the important thing, knowledge and awareness of who lives next to you and trying to find out who they are all about. So I think that's the important thing. We all do come from very different places maybe, but then, I mean, you try and find out about the cultures of the other person. In your essay, and you begin your essay in this book saying, ours is a story rarely told, a tale so politically incorrect, it has no takers. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, because this idea of somebody from the mainland being discriminated against is very novel. I mean, nobody ever thinks that because you belong to the mainland, you could be discriminated. And nobody has actually written a stories. Nobody's ever come on TV and said a thing like this. Nobody's ever contributed to a column and said these things. This is a very recent phenomena. In fact, I'd go as far as saying that Preeti's book is the first attempt at documenting this sort of a story. And so, I mean, if I feel it in my heart because I truly belong to the Northeast. I went to the Northeast when I was 9 years old. And I lived in Jorat, in Assam. I lived in Imphal. Wherever my father got transferred, I lived there. And then I fell in love with a girl from Shillong, so I married her, and then we went off to the tea garden. The idea was not to stay in Shillong, but somehow she was more comfortable in Shillong, so we came back to Shillong. So I feel very anguished when people say that you're an outsider, because I belong to Shillong. All my friends are Khasis or Nagas. I don't have a single Sardar friend over there. So it'll be nice, if this sort of assimilation. It's difficult for us to assimilate. There's nothing I can do to assimilate more than maybe speak the language. I eat all the foods over there. In fact, I like the food over there. But some of my features mark me to be not a Khasi or a Naga or something like that. And so on an individual level, we have no problems with each other. I have no problems at all. As long as people know me, I've never had a problem. But when it becomes a community thing or a political thing, and then you get caught in a situation, I've got caught in situations where there's rioting going on and you are accidentally going to land up in places like that, then you have no defense against things which are happening. Then nobody recognizes you. So this mob mentality is what causes a lot of problem. And unfortunately, I think throughout the country, we are giving into populism. This demand that son of the soil should be recognized, that they should get preference for everything. So this takes away from the concept of a very secular or a very homogeneous sort of a country where anybody can live anywhere. So I feel maybe that concept is a dying concept. When I got married, I remember my father telling me that you should get some money. There's a Government of India scheme that if you marry across the community, you're supposed to get some reward for it. But now I think it's a punishment if you marry across the community. It becomes difficult to live. Thank you.
Yesterday, you also said something about the new things that have come in. I mean, you talked about Mizoram and
Yeah, so what has happened is that in Meghalaya, there's a law which is sought to be passed. It has not been passed, where if you marry a Khasi girl, then she loses all her rights. and she's no longer considered a Khasi, your children will no longer be considered a Khasi. So that law has been passed by the Khasi Hills Autonomous District Council. It awaits the nod of the governor, the signature of the governor. It has not happened. And then what has happened is that I recently, about a month ago, Young Mizo Association, that is in Aizawl, Mizoram, has gone around schools and colleges asking young Mizo girls to pledge that they'll not marry outsiders. So, I mean, it's like in Bangalore, suddenly somebody came around and said that, okay, let's take a pledge, we'll not rent a house to outsiders. So then you will say that this is bad. But these things don't come into the national news. And then we have a ordinance which has been passed, the Meghalaya Resident Safety and Security Act. So, like Jahnavi's parents have got a house in Shillong, but they live in Guwahati. So as per this new ordinance, if you actually go to Shillong, if you're going to intend to stay more than 24 hours, you have to register online. And sooner or later, they're planning to have entry and exit points where you have to show that you came in on this day and you're leaving on this day. So people who straddle 2 places or 3 places and consider those to be their home, it becomes difficult for them to move across the country. Now imagine, I mean, if her parents have to go and they have to register every time. I have friends who have a home in Calcutta and who have another home in Shillong. And so this friend of mine plays golf with me. He comes here, comes to Shillong in the summers and plays golf here, and he goes to Calcutta in the winters. So just imagine all his Epic card and Aadhaar card is from Calcutta, but now every time he comes in, he'll have a problem coming and going. So it's sad, but that is what I was talking about, that if we succumb to populist pressures, then the concept of India is going to be lost. Thank you.
Jahnavi, you say in your essay about how your family has lived in Shillong for 90 years, and then you moved. Do you want to describe that move?
Yeah, like I said, Shillong became the capital of the northeast of India, right? So anybody to do anything to do with government, anything to do with business, you wanted to study in school, the best colleges were all there. So my great-grandfather moved from Upper Assam, from a place called Dergaon near Jorhat, to Shillong and built a house in a place called Laban. So that house stands. It's an old rustic, cottagey kind of rambling house, and it's going to be about 120 years old very soon. So having lived there, if you live 3 generations, people are born into a house, you celebrate your births, deaths, weddings, pujas, everything there. When you finally have to leave for a reason which is not of your own making, you don't choose to leave. I think for a long time the family felt, the family talk was always of, is the pear tree flowering? Have the pears fruited? Someone send the pears down. How's the apple trees doing? Every talk is, you celebrate joys in Guwahati, of course, but you hark back to Shillong. You want to know what the neighbors are doing. And so you left with this feeling. In a sense, growing up, I had the feeling I knew what it was like to be a refugee, in a sense, where you've lost your home town and you had to come away. And it kind of stays in your mind. It lingers. And I think I've constantly felt like that. It didn't help that my dad moved around every 3-4 years. He was in the IAS. It didn't help that my husband moved me every year for the first 10 years of our married life, standing there. So I think I've constantly felt like I need to pack my bags. I'm a gypsy, you know. And in Bangalore, I've been at a stretch for the last 15 years, the longest of my life. And I've enjoyed it in a sense. I love that moss. I'm growing some moss and I think I love it.
So that is what we try to do through this anthology. Basically, these are all little-known stories because it's not really the partition story as such that you've heard of and you've read. But these are all the stories, Sylhet, for example, or many parts of the Northeast, which went through all of this 2 times or even 3 times. And as a family, like for me personally, being Punjabi, being from now Amritsar, border town, so all these things which make border towns into vulnerable spaces, and all the migration that happens and the reasons for which it happens, whether it's economic or whether it's ethnic or whatever it might be. We can talk about all of that in a very academic fashion, yes, but I think you need to hear the real stories from people who've gone through it, or families that have actually faced all of this. And they may not be, everybody may not have died in the process, but plenty else happens to your mind when you travel like that. And as somebody who has heard stories of partition from my grandmothers, but who also saw 84 in Delhi, it makes you wonder at these lines that are being created in this country all the time. I think maybe we have time for one or two questions, or yeah, so maybe a couple of questions. And the book is available for sale at the bookshop. I think you will find it very worthwhile to read these stories.
Yeah. Wing Commander Butt. I spent 7.5 years in the Northeast, 3 years in Kumbigram. You can check it out. And 4.5 years in Guwahati, and got the daughter-in-law also from Assam. What I am a little surprised about, Paramjit is an ex-NDA guy. He's been through, I am also from the National Defense Academy. He's not touched upon that aspect, where you have so much of integration in the NDA. And to the extent that when I meet a Northeast person in Bangalore, I ask the girl usually, what do you tell them if they call you Chinky? And they don't have an answer. So I tell them something with one of my Air Force test pilot's son used to say. He had a very good answer. He would ask that person who was so insinuating, are you a Madrasi or are you a Bihari? As simple as that. So my point is, I think with this migration that is taking place, even to Bangalore, you see so many people coming here. Everybody is going to integrate. Only thing is they need to remove the inner line permit and develop more, the drug stuff and all. So anything further you can highlight on these points, it'll be nice. Thank you.
Yeah, but I don't see actually inner line being removed. In fact, there's a demand for states like Meghalaya who never had an inner line for them to have an inner line, and also from Manipur, which does not have an inner line, they're also fighting to get inner line permits. So I don't see how this is going to happen, because somehow a chord has been touched with the demand for that, and whether it's got widespread support or not, one does not know. But the more vociferous section demands that ILP should be imposed in these states.
Okay, my question is to Jahnavi and a bit to Paramjit also here. Both of you all spoke about insider, outsider. But when you sit down to write, what is the primary emotion that you write from? Have you understood the question? What's the primary question? What's the primary emotion? Is it an anguish? Is it a frustration? Is it an anger? What is the primary emotion that drives your writing?
If you're asking about general writing, I think any writer sits down to write from a need to communicate, a need to express yourself, and I think that's universal across. This particular anthology, specifically, I probably wrote from a sense of deep nostalgia, some amount of loss, but some amount of a deep understanding that I've moved around so much. And in the end, I do think we find what is home, from a sense of almost healing, my essay came from. Paramjit?
Yeah, so my case is a little different, because I've known Preeti since 1982. Her husband and I worked in the gardens together, and so she used to come to the Northeast and she used to tell me what a lovely place it is. And I used to tell her, if you live here, it's things are not as you imagine them to be. So when she was commissioning this anthology, she said, Paramjit, here's a chance for you to put your point of view across. So in my case, maybe as far as this piece is concerned, there's a lot of anguish, because it's a historical sort of anguish that my parents had to leave Rawalpindi and come across, and they barely settled down and lived there. And then again, I'm also in the same thing. Of course, I also acknowledge that I love to maybe not live in one place too long, but it's nice to feel that you're not an outsider. I'd like to belong. Even if I don't own a house or don't buy a house, I'd still like to belong to a place. I love the place I live in, naturally. I mean, nobody goes and lives in a place you hate, or the people you hate, amongst people you hate. So that is the point. So there's some anguish that I wish I'd gotten that thing that, I love the place and I got along with the people. I do that on an individual level, but on a community level, there's nothing I can do about it. Thank you.
Hello. I'll just tell my personal experience from Northeast. I'm from Northeast. I lived in Manipur. I was born and brought up there. I was working in a college. I'll just tell you one incident. That time in 1980s, I was teaching in a college. I was just going to the college, and there was an foreigners procession was going on. The small children, my own students, They were lining up all the children to go for a protest rally. I just got down from the bus and the children shouted, Mayang, Mayang, he should go away. That day I felt so bad and so anguished. I can't tell you, still it hurts me. Because I was born up there. I thought I'm Manipuri only. I never thought that they shaken me, I tell you. My students, they ran away. They could not face me. But I was shaken that day, I must tell you. And I had another story to tell. When from Manipur I came to Guwahati University. Okay, sorry. But this is the anguish we have. I can't tell you. Still now I feel so bad when I think about it.